Welcome back to the Football by Nico show. Today, I'm going to be talking about my personal rankings for players on defense. I'll be going over every single position, giving you my rankings, giving you some thoughts on each player's at the position. And just like I said on the other podcast, putting together positional rankings is never easy. Everyone sees and values things very differently. So for each position, I'm going to state my criteria for evaluating it. Some of the things, I value and give some major credit to are availability and versatility. For all of these players, first criteria for me is just who I want on my team, pretty plain and simple. And at the end, I'll go over my first team defense as a whole. Defensive rankings to me are a lot harder than offensive rankings because you have players that play different positions, as well as there being different archetypes, or types of players. Like, Jalen Ramsey is not going to be evaluated the same way as a Trayvon Diggs or Xavier Howard. So it's all about what, values to you more on defense. So let's get started with defensive tackles. For defensive tackles, I evaluated it on sacks, their impact on the team around them on that defensive line, and just the ability to get into that backfield and have a backfield presence and put pressure on the quarterback. Starting off at number one, no doubt about it, Aaron Donald, best defensive tackle out of all these guys. Number two, I've got Chris Jones from the Chiefs. He's been good with not much help around him, I think. I think that he's kind of been that anchor on the Chiefs defensive line that hasn't really helped him out that much in recent years. Number three, got Cam Hayward. Cam Hayward is the reason TJ Watt gets so many one-on-ones because he's just up there plugging the middle, and it's just been a force for the Steelers defensive line since he's been drafted. Great player. Love Cam Hayward. Number four, I've got DeForest Buckner. DeForest Buckner was a big reason for the Niners Super Bowl run a couple years ago. Now he's on the Colts, obviously. But I think that his ability to change the game also for a first rounder. So I think that speaks to his ability as a player overall. Then five, I've got Grady Jarrett. Grady Jarrett obviously is not on the best of defenses, but he's had and put up a couple good numbers on a bad defense. So that's why I have him ranked at five. Those are your kind of Aaron Donald-esque players, I would say. Aaron Donald kind of set the bar a little too high in terms of what a defensive tackle is supposed to do. So I think that, when you're evaluating on sacks, impact on team around them, and backfield presence, these are your kind of guys that can do everything. And then here's my next tier, starting off with Kenny Clark. These are more of the guys that are either run stoppers, they're just kind of big plugs up the middle, and just not the same kind of pass rushing that the other guys above them are. Vita Vea at 7. I think that he's one of the archetypes you can point to pretty well and say he's one of those run stopper kind of guys. 8, I have Javon Hargrave, part of that Steelers defensive line, now on the Eagles. 9, I have his teammate Fletcher Cox. I think that duo is going to be great next year. I think that even though Fletcher Cox is kind of getting there in age a little bit, I think that he's still a force up the middle. And I think that Javon Hargrave took advantage of the fact that he was on such a good defensive line on the Eagles last season. At 10, got Leonard Williams. Leonard Williams is another one of those guys that's like on a bad situation on the Jets and now on the Giants. So he still, even though he is on a bad situation, makes the best of his situation, still puts up good numbers. Moving on to defensive ends or outside linebackers, whatever you want to call them. Number 1, TJ Watt, reigning defensive player of the year. I think that Watt has been underlooked because of how Aaron Donald from the interior has made him seem the past couple of years. I think that, tying the sack record this past season was great for him. He's an amazing player. He gets those kind of one-on-ones on the outside because of how good the Steelers defensive line is, but he's still just an amazing edge rusher. At number 2, I've got Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett, former number 1 overall pick. I think that he's more of a power rusher, and TJ Watt is a little bit more of a finesse kind of all-around guy. So I think that Garrett is a little bit better at sealing the edge. I think that he's more versatile than Watt, but I don't think he's as transcendent of a player as Watt is. At number 3, got Joey Bosa. Joey Bosa is one of those guys who's, I guess you could consider him a veteran now, but he's just been one of those consistent forces off the edge. Hasn't been able to stay entirely healthy, but for the rest of these guys on the list, not everyone has, so I just kind of rank them as if they were fully healthy, who I'd want, really. I think that both of the Bosas are great. I think that Ohio State just breed defensive ends up there. And I think that him and Khalil Mack, who was next on my list at number 4, are going to be a great rushing duo after the AFC West quarterbacks next year. At number 6, I've got Micah Parsons. And Micah Parsons is one of those rookies last year that kind of came onto the scene, was ready, was giving you that kind of veteran presence, even though it was his first year playing last year. And I think that he had such a big impact in year one. The Cowboys can look around that defense and say, okay, we need to build around Micah. We need to build around his versatility as a player. We need to build around, even though he's kind of was drafted as a cover linebacker, we can build around him as a pass rusher. We can build around him as both. I really like his versatility as a player. And I think once I start to see some year 2 improvement for him, that's when I'll rank him a little bit higher. But for right now, it comes in at number 6. Number 7, got Max Crosby from the Raiders. Obviously, he was drafted right in the same draft class as Clelin Ferrell. One hasn't worked out. Max Crosby has. And I think that he's one of those guys that's been underrated just because he hasn't been that flashy, but his talent is definitely up there for sure. At 8, I've got Cameron Jordan. Cameron Jordan from the Saints has been a veteran consistency on their defensive line, been an anchor, been a leader, and he started every single game except his rookie year. So I think that that's great for him just to be that leadership and just to be the leader that the Saints need, after Drew Brees left. At 9, I've got Brian Burns. Brian Burns is one of those guys that's a young star. I think that he's got a lot of talent, and I think that he's just one of those guys that's in a bad situation. I don't know if I would say, but he's not doing great. And I know there was rumors of him getting moved out of Carolina a while ago, but I think that he's one of those guys that can take advantage of him being in not so great of a situation and flourish. So that just speaks to his talent as a player. At number 10, I've got Chase Young. Chase Young was the pick 2 for a reason. I think that he's very explosive off the line. Like I've said already, those Ohio State defensive ends are just built different. I think that the Commanders are going to have big plans for him, after rehab this year. And I think that he'll come back with a vengeance. But overall, he's one of those guys that I think is very explosive off the line. I think that he rushes the passer very well. All right, now moving on to linebackers. These are going to be the cover linebackers, not necessarily like what you would think of as like Von Miller or a TJ Watt type of linebacker. This is more of a Bobby Wagner kind of linebacker, a cover linebacker. For linebackers, I evaluated them on tackling, I evaluated them on coverage, and I evaluated them on their turnover ability. Coming in at number 1, I have the maniac himself, Darius Leonard. I think that he's one of those guys that you can just put on the field. He can create those turnovers. He can tackle. He can do literally everything you want from a cover linebacker. Definitely one of my favorite players to watch the past couple of years because he'll just randomly just jump a route and get that pick, and it's really exciting to see. Colts fans definitely should be stoked to have him on the defensive side of the ball. And in that same draft as Quentin Nelson, too, what a steal. I think that he can be the leader for the defense for years to come. And I think he's just getting started. Number 2, I've got Fred Warner. Fred Warner from the 49ers. I've unfortunately had to watch him be such a good player within the division. Great tackler. I think he goes in to tax the ball really well. Has very good instincts. At number 3, I've got Eric Kendricks. Eric Kendricks is another one of those guys that just has been a solid tackler for the Vikings. Big reason why their defense has been so good. And I think that his turnover ability as well is just game-changing for them. Number 4, I've got Demario Davis. Demario Davis from the Saints. Another one of those leadership presences on that defensive side of the ball for New Orleans. Been a solid tackler, been a solid turnover machine. And he's just a leader in their locker room, similar to Cameron Jordan. And he's also been consistent as well, which is a big part of why I have him ranked at number 4. Number 5, I have the newly signed Ram, Bobby Wagner. Now, Bobby Wagner hasn't been the same player he always has. I think he's probably going to play better than he has in recent years on the Rams next year because he's on a new defense, new scheme, some of the best players he's ever had around him, not even excluding Legion of Boom there. You have Aaron Donald on the front, you have Jalen Ramsey on the back, you have Bobby Wagner in the middle. How much better can it get? I think that it'll make it easier on him in terms of reading the defense and just pairing up with Ernest Jones is going to be amazing for him. At number 6, have another one of those older guys, Lavonte David from the Buccaneers. Lavonte David was kind of almost replaced by Devin White. I think that they drafted Devin White to be his replacement, but they were both just so good and pretty crucial in getting them that Super Bowl win that he just kind of stuck around as that veteran kind of guy. I don't think he's the same player that he used to be. Same with Bobby Wagner. But overall, he's one of those guys that is just the definition of a cover linebacker. I mean, you think cover linebacker in the NFL, obviously the first one that comes to mind is Bobby Wagner, Luke Kuechly, Lavonte David is one of those guys. And even though he didn't start all his games last year, still had almost 100 tackles, which just goes to show you, his presence on the Buccaneers. At number 7, got Roquan Smith. Roquan Smith is an interesting one because he's a young guy. He's not, kind of one of those older veteran type of linebackers, but he's been great for the Bears every time he's played for them. I mean, if you look at his stats last year, 163 combined tackles, 12 TFLs. He's a versatile player. An interception returned it for 53 yards. Overall, just a solid player all around. He's a young stud, drafted in 2018. Still got a good amount of years left in him. So I think that overall, when you look at young linebackers between Darius Leonard, Fred Warner, and Roquan Smith, you got a lot of them. Speaking of young linebackers, my next one is going to be Matt Milano from the Buffalo Bills. And Milano, drafted only a year before Roquan Smith, they just signed him to another contract, Buffalo. So he is on for the long haul. Has had a couple good years there. His best year was in 2019. But overall, between him and Tremaine Edmonds, he's a reason why the Buffalo defense was the top defense in the NFL last year in terms of yards given up. So overall, solid cover linebacker. And I think that he's a guy that you can expect to see more improvement from next year. At number 9, I have Deion Jones from the Falcons. Similar to Grady Jarrett, everybody thought he was going to be the next great linebacker, but just hasn't been playing to his full potential just because he's been on the Falcons. I think that's a big part of it. But overall in his rookie season, coming out and going to that Super Bowl, in years where he's played 16 games, had 100 tackles or more. So I think that that's not the best stat, I think, when it comes to linebackers is tackles, because Troy Reader, by that metric, is pretty good. But I think it's a good indicator of just how good they are at seeking out the ball and just making plays. It's not the best stat I would use to evaluate them, but it's a decent stat, I would say. So I think when you look at tackles for linebackers, you're just seeing how involved they are on defense. I know, like, Blake Martinez is another guy that gets a lot of tackles, but he's not the best linebacker. Coming in at 10, got Zach Cunningham, formerly from the Texans. I believe he's on the Titans now. He was one of those guys that just had a lot of talent, just never could put it together on the field because of the team he was on. The Texans just kind of weren't the team he had needed around him. So overall, great talent, just not the best team around him. Cornerbacks, starting off with coverage and just, all around cornerback. I think this is a pretty simple one, just who I would want in my secondary. At number 1, I've got Jalen Ramsey. Like I said before, I think it's absolutely crazy that the Rams have 3 future Hall of Famers on each level of the defense. Aaron Donald in the front, Jalen Ramsey on the backside, and Bobby Wagner in the middle. I think that he's one of the most versatile corners in the NFL. And just overall, he's been able to show his ability to not only cover guys, but also to play kind of a safety hybrid role in that star position that they've had this past year. And he was a big part of their Super Bowl run. Even if he goes viral when he misses a rep, he's still the best corner in the league. You can't deny it. Coming at number 2, I've got Jaire Alexander. Jaire Alexander is another one of those guys like Jalen Ramsey that can kind of erase, the wide receiver 1 and just take him out of the picture. I think that is the best use of a corner. It's just a nice cover corner that can, pretty much just take care of their wide receiver 1 and not even have to worry about them for the rest of the game. I think that's what Jalen does really well. I think Jaire does that really well as well. And overall, can't wait to see him come back from injury next year because he's a fun player to watch play as well. At number 3, I have one of the guys that I think is pretty underrated when people talk about cornerbacks. I have Marlon Humphrey. Now, Marlon Humphrey has been underlooked in my opinion. He has been one of the top corners in the league since he's been drafted, and he just kind of hasn't been getting that recognition. So overall, you look at his stats 2 years ago when the Ravens were so good. He had 3 interceptions. He always has a lot of forced fumbles. 8 in 2020, 2 in 2019. Last year he was hurt, so he only had 1. But just overall, a very good impact player. When you're throwing out Marlon Humphrey, him and Marcus Peters are going to either make an interception or make some sort of play on you. So I think that he's one of those guys that can kind of change a game if you get a turnover from him. Number 4, I've got J.C. Jackson, signed by the Chargers this past offseason. Calls himself Mr. Interception because he gets those interceptions. I think playing in the best defensive-minded head coach's scheme does help a little bit. But overall, a great talent. I think that he's going to do very good on the Chargers. The Chargers defense is going to be better than a lot of people think next year because you got Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Derwin James on the back end, J.C. Jackson. So overall, can't wait to see him play next year. Moving on, got number 5, Tre'Davious White. Another one of those kind of versatile corners that I've been talking about so far. Hasn't really defined his role yet as a corner, but it just is a really good cover corner and cover guy. Number 6, got Marshawn Lattimore. Now, if we're talking about him playing Mike Evans, he would be number 1, obviously, because he just absolutely erases Mike Evans off the face of the earth every time they play. I think that's always really funny to see. I always remember any time that New Orleans is playing Tampa Bay, not to start Mike Evans in any of your fantasy leagues because Marshawn Lattimore would just delete him from existence. So I think that he's one of those kind of cover corners, but he hasn't really reached the level of Jalen Ramsey or Alexander just yet, but still overall one of the best. Number 7, I have Xavier Howard. And Xavier Howard was in the conversation a while when he had that great pick year, but I don't think that kind of cornerback is the kind of cornerback you want consistently because interceptions aren't very sustainable. You can be a good cover corner and have that be sustainable, as we've seen with Jalen Ramsey and Jair Alexander. But when it comes to picks don't really last. Like, you can't consistently get picks all the time. And I know J.C. Jackson has been better at him than getting picks, I think, in my opinion, because he kind of reads the quarterback a little bit better. But turnovers don't make up for the fact that you give up more yards. I think that Marcus Peters is definitely the epitome of this. He's one of those guys that kind of just jumps the route and doesn't really look at the coverages happening behind him. So if he misses trying to grab the ball, I mean, you just have a 50-plus yard completion. That's not really the best. Personally, I think he's still a good player. He's just not the kind of player I would have, over some of the guys I've mentioned before him. At number 8, I've got Denzel Ward. Denzel Ward's a young, great corner, but I just need to see a lot more from him next year in terms of his play, and then I can start to move him up the list, maybe above Marshawn Lattimore even, depending on how he does next year. At number 9, got Darius Slay. Darius Slay is one of those guys that has been in the league for a while. He's a veteran, now on the Eagles, used to be with the Lions, and he's one of those guys that still is doing pretty good. I also think you can still respect his game as a corner, and that's why he made the top 10. At number 10, I've got AJ Terrell. I think that Terrell is going to be one of those next great cover guys for, similar to Jalen Ramsey, similar to Jair Alexander, similar to Marshawn. I think I just need to see more from him in year 2. This past season was kind of the first year we saw what AJ Terrell could be. So I just need to see that again from him to see that last season, just wasn't a fluke pretty much. Honorable mention to Trayvon Diggs. I know that Trayvon Diggs is one of those guys that's similar to Xavier Howard that kind of jumps the ball, gives up lots of yards, but he's good at getting those turnovers. I'll give both of them that. They're good at getting the turnovers. They just need to be good more all around, kind of like J.C. Jackson. Moving on to safeties to finish off the defense. I think it's very hard to rank certain players in certain positions since players are asked to play all around nowadays. There's lots and lots and lots of talent at safety because there needs to be. It's a passing league. And so for safeties, I'm just going off of tackling, going off of interceptions, and I'm going off of a little bit of PFF because I think that they do a good job when it comes to safeties. So starting off a free safety, got Justin Simmons. He's one of those guys that got an extension recently. He's been playing good ever since he got drafted. Two have got Kevin Byard, had a great year last year. Got 2 picks against the Rams, unfortunately. And I think that he's one of those guys that can read quarterbacks very well and make that play. On number 3, I've got Jesse Bates. Jesse Bates might not be in the Bengals much longer, but he still was great with his tenure with them. Number 4, I've got Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think that Minkah is a guy that the Steelers asked to do a lot for. He's been that anchor for the defense the past couple years on the back end, and he's kind of helped the secondary evolve from what it used to be. At 5, I've got Marcus Williams. Just joined the Ravens, which I'm really excited to see because their secondary now is just great. And now finishing off the free safeties, honorable mention to John Johnson, former Ram, now a Brown. Solid cover safety all around. Not great at any one thing, but just a solid player. Moving on to strong safeties, I'm going off of tackles, sacks, interceptions, and PFF grade. Pretty much the same thing I was going off of for free safeties, but we're just taking into account what kind of positions did these players play. Tyrann Mathieu coming in number 1. I think he's the best all-around strong safety. They call him the landlord for a reason, and he just covers the field in such great blanket coverage that you don't want to throw anywhere near him. At number 2, I've got Harrison Smith. Great anchor for that Vikings defense on the back end. Good veteran presence. On number 3, I've got Jamal Adams. A lot of people like to call him Blitz Boy, but I think that he's one of those guys that I probably should be classified as a defensive end in some cases because they just kind of send him on pass rushes, but he's been very good on getting to the quarterback, so that is why I have ranked him at number 3. Isn't really used the same as he was on the Jets, so I think that kind of contributes to it, but overall, still a solid player, great impact to the game. 4, I've got Adrian Amos from the Packers. I think that the Packers secondary kind of leveled up because of his inclusion to them. I think that between him, Rasul Douglas, Jair Alexander, their secondary is going to be one to fear next year. And finishing the list at number 5, I've got Budda Baker. Budda Baker from the Cardinals, one of those guys, like I've said, great on the back end, solid tackler, use him a lot, good tackler in open space. Overall, still a great player. And then to finish off the strong safeties, honorable mention to Jordan Poyer. That Bills safety duo, I would say, is right underneath. I would say Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde. Great safety duo. Big reason why the Buffalo defense was so good. So, rounding out the defense, my first team defense is going to be defensive tackles, Aaron Donald and Chris Jones. Defensive ends, TJ Watt and Myles Garrett. Linebacker, Darius Leonard. Linebacker, Fred Warner. Cornerback, Jalen Ramsey. Cornerback, Jair Alexander. Cornerback, J.C. Jackson. Free safety, Justin Simmons. And strong safety, Tyrann Mathieu. I do prefer a 4-3 defense in case you couldn't figure it out, because I think that now more than ever, you kind of need to get after the quarterback. And between these 4 guys on the defensive line, you're getting a sack probably every other play. Moving on to special teams. Now, special teams is one of those things that's very hard to rank because there's a lot of turnover year to year. If you look at fantasy football, which kind of is a good indicator for special teams, because it's based on scoring, it's based on accuracy. You can kind of see that the kicker has been different almost every year. So it's pretty hard to rank kickers. So for this one, instead of a top 10, I'm just going top 5. So I have kicker, punter, and returner. Starting off with kicker, I evaluated them on field goal and extra point percentage and just the leg talent, which just means, are you looking at them and can they just bomb one through the uprights or get you those touchbacks? Number 1, got Justin Tucker. Tucker's obviously the best clutch kicker the Ravens have had ever. And I think that he's probably top 5 kickers all time in the NFL, maybe even top 3. Number 2, got Harrison Butker. Harrison Butker, another one of those great leg talents. He always just goes and bombs his warm-ups. So I think that the Chiefs love him for that reason. They call him Butt Kicker. And he's another one of those people that has that great leg, which moves us into number 3. Another great leg, we have Matt Gay, former soccer player. And Matt Gay was phenomenal for the Rams last year. I think he missed only about 2-3 kicks the entire year. And he just, my first impression from seeing him in training camp was, compared to the other kickers, was wow. I don't know how this is possible, but he has a monster leg. This dude was absolutely shooting lasers through the uprights. And I think that he's going to be the Rams special teams anchor, just as Johnny Hekker was their anchor. Moving into 4, I've got Younghoe Koo. And Koo was one of those kickers that had an amazing season a couple years ago, kind of dropped off in production the past 2 years. I think we all remember when he went and just kept doing onside kicks and it just kept working, which is crazy. I think he's got a great field goal percentage. He's got a great just overall kicker ability. Coming in at 5, I've got Daniel Carlson. Carlson is kind of had a breakout years with the Raiders the last couple seasons. And I think that even though the Vikings had him, they didn't appreciate him as much as they should because he's one of those top 5 guys that you can kind of count on in clutch time. Honorable mention to Chris Boswell. Chris Boswell has kind of redeemed himself past couple years when he hasn't been great before. Moving on to punters. Shout out Pat McAfee, one of my favorite sports broadcasters. For punters, I went off of punt average. And just going back to the last 2 or 3 years, just because it was hard to average, just last year. At number 1, I've got Michael Dickson. Ever since he was a rookie, he's been phenomenal for the Seahawks. Tress Way made the Pro Bowl a couple seasons ago. Still a great punter. Number 3, I've got Jake Bailey. Bill Belichick really knows how to get those special teams guys. At number 4, I've got AJ Cole. AJ Cole and Daniel Carlson definitely helped the Raiders have a top special teams unit. Number 5, I've got Jack Fox. Now, out of all of these guys, if I were to guess which one punts the most, probably would say Jack Fox because he plays for the Lions. So I think that he has not only the stats to back himself up, but he also has the fact that he's probably punting way more than some of these other guys are. And honorable mention to Johnny Hekker because he was the best punter past 5 or so years when he was in his prime. Now, not so much, but that's why the Rams had to get rid of him. But overall, one of my favorite players to watch, especially with the fake punts. Moving on to returner, finishing off. I have return yards per game as the pretty much only criteria, and I kind of ranked them on the eye test based on just watching them myself. Number 1, got Cordero Patterson. I thought that this was the perfect place to mention just how amazing of a player he was. Falcons finally figured out how to unlock his full potential, even though he's been on I think about 5 teams the past couple of years. I think that he was drafted a while ago, but somehow we're just seeing what he can do as a player now. Great returner. Number 2, I've got Jamal Agnew. Jamal Agnew used to be with the Lions, now plays for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He tied the NFL record for the longest play return with a 109 return of Matt Prater's missed field goal. DeAndre Carter spent last season with the Washington football team, but overall has just been a solid returner. He averaged about 8.5 the last couple years. At number 4, I've got Andre Roberts. I'm definitely a veteran returner. And 5, got a young guy, Devin Duvernay from the Ravens. So that will wrap up today's podcast. I really hope you enjoyed hearing me talk about the defense and special teams rankings. Obviously, if we're talking about a first team special teams, I'm going to go Justin Tucker, Michael Dickson, Cordero Patterson. And overall, special teams and defense. This was much harder to do than the offense. So I appreciate you listening. If you have any disagreements with anything on this list, tweet me at footballbynico and we can have a conversation about it. To be updated every time a new episode of the podcast drops, you can follow me at footballbynico on Twitter. Thanks so much for listening.